Hi, I'm Bob, and welcome to Between the Sheets, where we look at Microsoft Excel and related technologies. Excel is great not just for recording numbers that happened in the past, like sales and expenses you made, but also for figuring out the future. You might need to decide which car to buy, or where you get the best deal on printing, or how many people to hire. All these decisions have inputs or variables you need to determine. What happens if this number is higher or that number is lower? That's what Excel's what-if tools are for. In this episode, I want to show you three of them: GoalSeek, Data Tables, and Scenario Manager. They all work in the Windows and Mac editions of Excel, but these tools don't exist in the online edition as of this recording. So let's take a look and see how it works. In this example, Friendly Grounds needs to buy a new building and equipment to roast coffee beans. We think the total amount we have to borrow for it is $100,000. The interest rate for this sort of thing will probably be around 3%, and we're guessing we can pay it off in 10 years. So to calculate this, I'm going to use the payment function. The payment function tells us every month when we have to make a payment on this loan, how much is that going to be? Let's take a look at the syntax. So the way this works is we say equals PMT, and there's three required arguments. The first is the yearly interest rate, the second argument is how many years to pay back, and the third required argument is what is the present value. You see there are two optional arguments, future value and type. I'm not going to use these in this example. Future value by default is 0 because when you finish paying off the loan, it has a value of 0, right? You finish paying it off, you don't owe anything, so it just makes more sense to leave that off. The type is the payment due at the beginning of the month or at the end of the month? I've never seen one that has payment due at the end, so by default the type is 1, meaning payoff at the beginning, so I'm just going to ignore those two optional arguments. So let's go do it. I'm going to say equals PMT, open up the parenthesis. So the first is the rate, and there's that 3%. Now we have to be careful because that's 3% per year. We need to calculate what is the monthly payment. So I'm going to take that 3% and I'm going to divide by 12. So that's our first argument. What is the monthly rate? Comma. Next argument is how many periods. So we said there's 10 years. I'm going to click that. But also, we are not paying just once a year. We're paying 12 times a year. So for that, I'm going to multiply by 12. So that's the second argument, comma. And what's the present value? Well, the present value of the loan, there it is. That's what we said, is that 100,000. So I'm going to choose that, close the parenthesis, and I'm going to press Control-Enter or Command-Enter on the Mac. And you can see that the monthly payment is going to be about $965. Now, you might think this looks a little unusual because it's a negative number. You might wonder, well, yeah, why is that negative? The reason is that it's cash outflow. It's cash coming out of your pocket. So that's a negative number. That's correct, but if you want to show this to somebody and they might not really be familiar with this, they might think that's kind of strange. So here's what we could do to kind of sweep that under the rug. I'm going to double click that, and that present value there, that D5, I'm going to put a minus sign before it and enter again. So now it's a positive number. So kind of it's like someone is paying us that $100,000, but that's just to get rid of that minus. Okay, so this is great. Here's where the what if analysis comes into play. On the ribbon bar, I'm going to go to the Data tab. And over towards the right, you see we've got this what if analysis. So I'm going to click that. And you see there are the three what if tools that we're going to look at. So I'm going to start with GoalSeek. So GoalSeek says, okay, what cell am I setting? Well, that's cell D8. There's where that payment is. So I'm going to say, okay, I want to set that to 800. What am I going to change to get there? Well, let's say I'm going to borrow a different amount. So by changing cell, I'm going to click that present value and click OK. And it says, okay, if you're going to pay $800 a month at 3% for 10 years, the amount to borrow is only going to be $82,849. Now, at this point, I've got two options. If I click OK, that's going to leave that number in place. If I click Cancel, I go back to my original numbers. Well, let's do this again. Let me go back to GoalSeek, and let's say the reverse is true. Maybe we're a little flush, and we figure, well, maybe we could afford to pay $1,100 a month. So I'm going to take that D8, I'm going to change that to $1,100, and this time I'm going to change how many years to pay off, because if we could afford to pay a little bit more, we could pay the loan off quicker and save some money. So I'm going to change that, click OK. And now we could see that if we're going to borrow $100,000 at 3% and pay $1,100 a month, it means we can pay this loan off in just a little more than 8.5 years. So again, I'm just going to cancel out. I want my original numbers back. So this is great, but the limitation of GoalSeek is that we can only see one example at a time. We can change one of those inputs and see what the result is, but we have to keep doing it over and over again. So this is where data tables come into play. Let's go down a little bit. And you see in this little box here, I'm substituting different numbers of years that we can pay back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this payment function, I'm going to copy it to the clipboard, escape out, just so I don't have to rewrite it. I'm just going to double click on that cell and paste, so I have that in there. So it's the same exact thing. So I'm going to go and select all the cells in that box. Now I'm going to go back to what if analysis. And this time I choose data table. And where it says row input cell, well, there is no row that I am substituting, so I'm going to leave that box blank. So I'm going to click in here where it says column input cell. So there's the column that I selected, right? This is various possibilities of the number of years. So that column input cell, I'm going to click right there in D7, right? Because that's what I'm substituting down the column is the number of years. Click OK. And it gives me the results. Let's format it. I'm going to select that, go back to the Home tab, and I'm just going to give it comma formatting so we could see it easier. So there we go. So this is telling us that if we borrow $100,000 at 3%, here's how much the monthly payment is going to be if we pay it off in different years. So there's that 10 that we started off with, right? $965, and we see it there. Well, if it takes us 25 years to pay it off, then our monthly payment is only $474. If we pay it off really fast in 5 years, then our monthly payment is about $1,800. So that's great. Unlike GoalSeek, we can see a whole bunch of different possibilities at once. But what if we do want to substitute two possibilities at the same time? Let's go down to this tab over here, and I'm going to use the same example. And there it is. I don't really need to paste in there. I'm going to double click on this cell and paste in that payment function. Everything is in the same spot, so we get the same result. Now, what we're doing is down column A, just like in the previous example, these are a different possible number of years, but across row 11, see, these are different possible amounts that we can borrow. And also, just like in the previous example, it's important that this function that we are working on has to be in that spot. It has to be in the upper left corner. If you don't put it in the upper left corner, the thing just isn't going to work. So let's select all of the cells there. So we've got that whole column, that whole row. Now I'm going to go back to the Data tab, back to What If Analysis, back to Data Table. Now this time we do have a row input cell, right? Because row 11, that is substituting for what? For that present value. So I'm going to click on that 100,000. Now the column input cell, just like before, this column down column A, that's different number of years. So I'm going to click again on D7. Click OK, gives us the result. Again, let's format it so we can read it a little easier. Select it all. Go to the Home tab. I'm going to apply the comma formatting. And let's just say here, I'll click on that cell just randomly. So this means that if we borrow $95,000 at 3% and pay back over 10 years, the monthly payment is $917. Click over here. If we borrow $110,000 at 3% for 25 years. Our monthly payment is $521, and so on. So you can see by substituting these different combinations of the present value and the number of years we're paying back, we have this whole table of different possible monthly payments that we can look at, and we could decide which is the best one. So that's great. But wait, there's more. What if we want to substitute more than two variables? What if we want a whole lot of different examples? That's where we use Scenario Manager. I'm going to go to the third tab here for scenarios, and I'm going to, again, double-click the cell, paste in that payment function just so we don't have to redo it. Okay, so we have this in here, and let's go open up Scenario Manager. So on the Data tab of the ribbon bar, I go back here to What If Analysis, go to Scenario Manager, and here's this panel, and there's no scenarios in there yet. We're going to go and create some. Cosmetically, this looks a little different between the Windows and Mac editions. In the Windows edition, there's a button for Add. In the Mac edition, there's just a plus sign. Same thing. So I'm going to click that, and it asks for a name. So this is just a friendly name for this particular scenario. So I'm going to call this Initial Values. And it says, what cells do you want to change? So I'm going to choose, there's the present value, comma, there's the interest rate, comma, there's the number of years. So those are the three arguments, the three parameters we're going to change. The comment, this is just the equivalent of a yellow sticky note, so I'm going to call this starting values before changes. And down here it's asking about protection. That protection is if you were going to protect the worksheet, if you're going to lock the worksheet, if you're going to lock cells in the worksheet. We're not going to do that in any of these examples. So right now, whatever these checkboxes are, it doesn't matter. So I click OK. It says, OK, what values do you want? What value do I want for D5? I'm going to leave that. What value do I want for D6, for D7? I'm going to leave all of those alone. Click OK. And there it is. And you see this box just tends to jump around on the screen. And it says, OK, there's the initial values. Now we could start making some substitutions. So I'm going to go and add another one. And I'm going to call this low monthly payment. Or let's call this, low amounts. How's that? The cells that we're changing, we don't have to modify that. The comment, we could put in whatever we want. Click OK. And now I'm going to say, OK, for this, instead of 100,000, maybe I will make that, let's say, 80,000. And that interest rate of 3%, well, maybe we're only going to qualify for, let's say, 3.5%. So let's change that. And this D7, 10 years, let's say, well, maybe we have to go up to 12 years. And we'll see what that is. Click OK. And when we do that, you see these are both now in the Scenario Manager. So we can have as many of these as we want. Let's do a few more. So I'm going to add another one. And I'm going to call this maybe borrow a little more. Everything else here is the same as before. Click OK. And for this, instead of 100,000, let's make this 110,000. Leave that as 3%. 10, maybe let's make that 14 years. Now, if you're going to do a whole bunch of these, instead of every time you put in these values, click OK, back in Scenario Manager, create another one, you could sort of shortcut this and just click Add, and that'll just take you into another one, so you don't have to keep doing all that. It just saves you a few clicks. So I will call this borrow a lot more. OK it. And maybe this is going to be 150,000. And the interest rate, well, maybe we could qualify for 2.5%. So let's change that. And then the number of years, let's make that, I don't know, 15 years. And let's do one more. And I'm going to call this long payback. OK it. So for this, let's say we're only going to borrow 90,000, and maybe this is going to be 3.25%, and the payback, instead of 10 years, this is going to be 20 years. And okay, so now we've got a whole bunch of these scenarios. Here's how we can see them. It's a little different between Mac and Windows. In the Windows edition, you can double-click one of these and the numbers will pop up. In the Mac edition, you select it and click Show. Otherwise, it's the same thing. So I can click one of these, I see what the results are. Here's the changes there. There's that monthly payment changing. I'll do this one, I'll pick this one and show it, and we can see those are changing. And you might think, okay, well, this is great, but isn't this just kind of like GoalSeek, but we just have a whole bunch of them stored? Well, here's where the magic happens. You can see all of these at once. See, there's the summary button, and just in a different location depending on Mac or Windows edition, but it's the same thing. I'm going to click Summary, and it says, okay, do you want a scenario summary or a pivot table? We want a scenario summary. The result cell is D8. You can see there's the marching ants. Click OK. And look at that. It creates a brand new worksheet in this workbook. Let me zoom in. And you can see here are all the results all spread out for us on the worksheet. Now, it doesn't know what these cells are, D5, D6, so you could go and manually edit them, right? So I can say, well, this is the present value, this is the yearly rate, and this is the number of years, and let's say this one is the monthly payment. So we can make any changes we want. Keep in mind, there is absolutely no connection between this table and the source data. There is no formulas here. These are all just input data. So, don't expect that you can make a change in one place and it will happen in the other. And you might need to stretch out the columns if necessary to make sure everything is readable. But it looks pretty good. And if you make some more changes, if you delete, recreate, change, whatever, any of those summaries, you could always go back to the scenarios and run them again. You could go back into the Scenario Manager. When I go into that what-if analysis and I go to Scenario Manager, here they are. So this is stored with the file. So you could go and save this file, close it, turn the computer off, come back in later, and these are all going to be available. Oh, and those comments that we were doing, you might wonder, where the heck are they? Well, notice that row 4 is missing, and we've got this little plus sign there. So when I click that plus sign, and that expands it, and now you can see all of those comments. So by default, they're hidden, and if you want, you can show them, and you can hide them again if you like. These 3 features are very helpful when you need to look at different possible outcomes. You can see they're much more streamlined than creating dozens of columns and doing it all manually. So until next time, my name is Bob, and this has been Between the Sheets.